It doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's cool. But my dad was like, "Oh, don't forget to record that. You never record. You always just talk." So here we are. Sorry, yeah, it's for my parents.
Love it.
So with the economic impact, I am completely biased toward this topic as well. I am African American, if you haven't figured that out. Been black my whole life. My dad has a degree in business from San Francisco State, so I was doing Excel spreadsheets and making my own businesses with my sisters at the age of 8 years old. My first business was called LMN Incorporated. I was 8, my sister was 7, my other sister was 10. LMN is Latifa, Miles, and Nafisa. Okay, it's just our names. We grew up Islamic, so that's why we have Latifa and Nafisa. My middle name is Rashad. It's probably too much info. But we had a Kool-Aid stand. That's how black we were. In my community, we call that blackity black, right? So we had, rather than a lemonade stand, we sold Kool-Aid in front of our house in this View Park community, which is a affluent black community in Los Angeles. It's actually like the 3rd or 4th richest community, African-American community in the United States. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on when we get to a company called Slauson & Co., which is currently making historical impact right now in 2023, okay? So the reason that I'm gonna need you to write stuff down is because I need to know what you think, and I won't know unless I ask you, but you might not know what you think until I ask you these questions, okay? So I'll talk, I'll stop. I'll ask, you'll write. 2 brave souls. Every single time, we'll move on, rinse and repeat.
Woo!
Sounds good? Cool. And then all of a sudden, it'll be 11:15. So I'll read a little bit, but then I will go off script. Because once again, I know 10 times more than what I have in my notes. But I use my notes to help structure this. So I'm not rambling on 2 slides for an entire hour. Sounds good? Any questions? Any concerns? Are you ready? All right, strap in, get your seatbelts on, and we're gonna dive in. Okay, so first thing I want to say formally and from my notes is that the economic history of the United States is deeply intertwined with the contributions, struggles, and resilience of African Americans. So from the earliest days when we were forced labor during slavery to present day, African Americans have played a pivotal role in shaping the nation's economy. So our journey in the economic exploitation and systematic discrimination, all the way to entrepreneurship and innovation and economic power, will be the focus of this entire testament to the enduring spirit of the African American community here in the United States. Well, African American already implies the United States. The African American community and how we've continuously overcome challenges, because it is the overcoming that I like to focus on the most. All right. And so in our exploration today, we'll look at the economic impact, but we'll also be able to dive into a couple historical moments. We'll also be to dive into specific people who have been able to lead and make significant economic impact. And with this, we'll go over things, but not dive too deep into them. That can dive into the agricultural South. It can also dive into the Harlem Renaissance. It can also dive into the Civil Rights Movement. We'll also dive into Black entrepreneurship. We'll also talk a little bit about resilience and progress. And then we'll specifically definitely talk about the ongoing pursuit of the economic impact that African Americans are making, because that's just not readily talked about. And I look at that stuff all the time, and I think it'll be absolutely fascinating. History is not only what has happened, but what is currently happening today. Because one day, what you're doing right now will be history for Cal State Fullerton. That level of impact and scale is up to you. So when we look at the legacies of different people, come on in, take a seat anywhere. You're good to go. We're still on the first slide.
Good morning, Paige.
So we're going to talk about Robert L. Johnson. Does anybody know who that is?
I don't.
All right, awesome. I mean, not really. You will know today.
Your Tiger Woods fist pump?
It is. Little Tiger Woods, little Michael Jordan. You know what I mean? We would not be talking about athletes today. Okay? Love them, though. All right? We'll talk about the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company and that's economic impact as an African-American community. We'll also be looking into movements such as the Black-owned venture capital funds that are happening basically over the last 5 years. And then as we navigate kind of this intricate timeline of African American economic impact. I just want to take time to look at some remarkable achievements of different people across different spaces. Some that might have, in layman terms for today, 1,000 followers, and some that may have millions. So this is all about the growth and the evolution of African Americans and their economic impact. So just to be straightforward, we'll talk about slavery and Reconstruction because we have to. This is just where it starts for America, at least. You know, we won't go back to Mansa Musa in Africa, and we won't go back into other things where we can talk about like the Moors and them taking over Europe and being able to create a whole civilization there and take Europe out of the Dark Ages. Because I would be here forever, as much as I would love that. Then we'll talk about the North Carolina Mutual Insurance Company and other companies like it. Then we'll talk about Bob Johnson. That's who Robert L. Johnson is. He founded BET, Black Entertainment Television. And then we'll also talk about venture capital and tech, because that's where we are today. And once you know historical contexts and you can't put it into a present moment of understanding, then I think you're missing the mark. And then finally, we'll talk about where you can learn more, because I know so much more, and you could too, if you're interested and if you're excited to take this type of topics and information outside of the classroom. So, do we know what slavery is? Great, thank you. Brave soul number one. Okay, so we're gonna take 2 minutes, and I want you to write down what you think was the economic impact of slavery. On your phone, piece of paper, on a laptop. You should be writing anywhere from, let's say, 3 to 5 sentences. And then we'll come back in like 3 minutes for my 2 brave souls. Thank you in advance.
You said, what is the economic?
What do you think the economic impact of slavery is? Keyword in that is.
Oh, current.
Not was.
Okay.
What do you think the economic impact of slavery is? So think about what it was, but what does that mean today? It doesn't mean anything. Brave soul number one. Anybody? I know we're starting off tense. Like, dang, you gonna start with slavery? That's like the most intense topic of all.
Leica?
So I think it kind of influences how we treat other people because it set the standard of white supremacy in general. So because of that, if we treat people who are not white as like poor, then we do tend to like, then society's like kind of structured to like steal money from the poor, which because of that has turned to a lot of stealing money from African American folks. And I think it also led to, like, because of that struggle, it led to a lot of resilience and like, in the sense of like, if society keeps stealing money from me, I'll just make more. I have to make more. It doesn't really matter.
I take that and I receive that fully. I would not react nor respond. I'm looking for brave soul number 2. Okay. Thank you. I think those were great points. I'm just trying not to show my own biases. Brave soul number 2. I like that. That was great.
Cold call them?
Right, I can't.
Terrorism.
All right, what's your name? Thank you for speaking. I appreciate you. You're so brave. All right, thank you. Give me one sentence. You couldn't think of anything? Okay. Who else couldn't think of anything? Oh, yeah. Go.
Yeah, kind of add on to what Leica said, but I would say like just our society is failing to recognize us. So it's just like when we do try to do things the legal way, it's like, okay, nobody recognizes us, no one wants to help us, nobody wants to support us financially. So it's like we find these illegal ways to do things, which end up getting us thrown into like the prison system, and like now they're making money off of us, but it's like it's not getting put back into our society.
Right. Okay. Okay. I take that. I receive that. I will not respond. So you can do that. Well, really, that's just for the first person who goes, so that way I don't impact what the second person says. Overall, I think you all are like spot on with what you're saying. Okay. So basically, that exploitation has impacted the mindset of the African American population and their like actual tangible opportunities. Those tangible opportunities would soon become illegal through laws like Jim Crow, therefore finding a way to systemize that impact of slavery. So when slavery, they first enslaved who before they got to black people? It was a process. Who was the first
white people?
White people. And what type of white people? Were they rich?
Poor.
Poor, right? And then they try to like switch it around and say, oh, you can do indentured servitude and you'll just owe me 7 years of your life for hard labor if I can get you across the Atlantic Ocean, right? So they went from, you're enslaved, we can't keep you, you're one of us, so we can't do it. We're gonna do indentured servitude, same thing, you're paying us back. Don't get into debt, paying us back. Anyways, so now you're indebted to your fellow Europeans, and then boom, they run away, can't catch them. They look like all the other citizens who paid their rightful way to be in the colonies. Then the entire time this is happening, they're also like, oh, look at the Native Americans. Let's try consistently coming to here. But measles, problems, they're already established, they have tribes, they have community here, so they eventually get to, we just have to go to war and commit basically genocide. People debate that, I don't think it's debatable. Then you get to Africans, and they can see the agricultural advancements, right? They remember that impact of the Moors from the 1300s, bringing in different type of advancements and said, we know they have resources, we know they have skills, we know they have civilization. When it comes to agriculture, they're clearly ahead of us because, you know, in Europe, they're experiencing famines and things of that nature and a lack of resources, which basically inspired their entire imperialistic reign. And therefore, they said, let's go to the people who already know how to do this. So you see things like sweet potatoes and yams coming over to the United States. It's coming over from Africa, right? And then you look at this different agriculture. They said, can you take this irrigation system that you created and invented way, who knows how long, back into African history and basically bring it to the United States, which looks like good land to be able to prosper. And when you run away, we'll be able to see it. So in fact, we'll take slavery, which already existed as a system and a structure across the entire world, but make it racialized here in the United States so we can see it on site. Oh, I thought you were gonna catch that. Can you pass that back? And we want to make sure that when you're going somewhere, running away from this forced labor, that we'll be able to see it. So now economic classes become a racial class. And that's something to point out with slavery. So now today, in all the statistics that we look at through history, you start paying attention to your classes, this class, and beyond, you'll notice this racialized lens for a lot of conversations about what blacks or whites or Asians or Latinos or orange, white, blue, yellow, green, whatever race they're coming up with next, right, will be categorized economically that way. And we'll look at that. We talk about wealth gaps, right? The wealth gap is basically looking at white males, right, and seeing how everyone can get to that level, right? The gender gap, how we get to that level, right? Why is it that they are perceived that way, right? It's from this history in the United States of they were the slave owners, they're the people creating the governments, they're the ones who are saying, if you can't shoot, kill, and beat up me and my army, then at the end of the day, you will not be a citizen, you will not be accepted, you will not be able to participate. Which is interesting because that goes into land ownership or ownership overall with property, right? So now the US government is saying we're going to make sure in our creation that we're creating an opportunity for us to economically thrive, and slavery is now our #1 economic opportunity, right? And so there's so many different, let's say, economic opportunities are coming from this land ownership. If you can come to the United States and own land, and then you own slaves who could work your land, then you have a greater opportunity to build up wealth. And that same cotton, indigo, tobacco is all fueling, right, from the south, but it's going straight to the north, to the textiles, where they can then take all of that material and turn it into something that the merchants can then leave and sell abroad, or sell in other aspects and places that we were expanding to, right? This is a system where we kind of have the barter system, we're kind of creating the dollar, right? In that system, we're also establishing some independence as a nation. So there's a lot going on, but overall with the economics, it comes down to ownership, which I would argue and debate to this day in the United States. If you're not positioning yourself to be an owner of something or some things, then you're probably not putting yourself in the best capitalistic position to win the American dream. A dream that didn't even exist for the slaves, barely existed for the poor whites at that time, and barely existed for anybody else, because at that point the conversation was really just black and white, right? As the Native Americans are essentially being wiped out through disease and war. So we hear this thing. Have anybody ever heard of Spike Lee?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does anybody know what the name of his company is that he has for his productions? Don't say it. I know you know the answer. Or you'll probably figure it out. Because you're a doctor of this. Called 40 Acres and a Mule. Have you heard that phrase before? Yes, I got one yes. I'm getting a maybe. I'm getting a no. I'm getting a, I know what all those words mean, but I don't know what it means as 40 Acres and a Mule. So when the Emancipation Proclamation happened, right, there was this promise from Abraham Lincoln and his staff, essentially, saying that now that you've been enslaved, so sorry about that, we're going to go to war to free you, and now that the only way that we can win the war is to take a whole population of people that haven't been recognized as citizens and say, hey, you now have an opportunity to be a citizen, and if we can win this war, the North guarantees your citizenship. And even in addition to that, right, we're going to actually give you 40 acres of land and a mule. Because a mule can be, you can attach a plow to a mule, and the mule can take it, and then you can create essentially the same irrigation systems that we were talking about earlier, right? From these people who are the agricultural leaders of the entire United States, even though they're enslaved because, well, they're enslaved. So now you are supposed to reach freedom, you're supposed to have this opportunity to exist, and you have 40 acres and a mule, you have an opportunity to own land, and now if you can own land, you can produce essentially your own crops. You can produce crops in an agricultural era of America, you are now in the best position to officially win. Because either you need to grow the crops or be able to take the crops and turn them into another product, or you need to be able to take that product and sell that product on behalf of the manufacturer or on behalf of the actual plantation that created the crops. Does that make sense? Does that work? Okay. So with that information so far, can you have a better idea of potentially how that can impact, how slavery can have an impact on today? Or does it just seem still historical in that time? So if you think that you have a better idea of how this can impact how, I guess, America today from that information, can you raise your hand? And if you don't, keep your hand down. A little bit more, I'm getting on little halfsies. Good. We still got time. So with that, there was an opportunity for education and entrepreneurship with the promise of 40 acres and a mule coming to African Americans. And they said, okay, I either need to learn or I need to be able to build for my own. And this is an opportunity to do so. So we have this era called Reconstruction that happens right after slavery. People are expecting their 40 acres and a mule, and then Abraham Lincoln gets assassinated. His vice president, who then becomes the president, decides, I don't like 40 acres and a mule. I only ran with Abraham Lincoln because he was from the North and he needed to win the presidency. And his vice president was from the South and said, I don't even like black people. I'm just running so that you can win, I can win, and if you die, I can become president. That happened, and he said, yeah, we need to take over the South, but we don't need to eliminate the culture that exists in the South. So maybe we're getting rid of slavery because obviously we can see the textiles of the North are now having an advantage and an opportunity to take us further into economic security as a nation and economic sovereignty as a nation. And we have to compete with our Europeans who are in the industrial revolution of their own right now. And so after that, we go into an industrial revolution where agriculture no longer becomes our economic advantage, having laborers for the economic advantage, having forced laborers, slaves, for that economic advantage loses its luster and power, right? A little bit, right? Because there's a whole population of people, specifically the poor whites of the South, who now establish their own identity to be above the blacks because now their race was also an economic status symbol because that was established in the South. Because if you were black, you were a slave, and that's your economic class. If you're white and even you're poor, then you're at least above the blacks because you can choose to work versus being forced to work. And so today's society, where we have this default thought of all white people being rich, which is not true, right? But in the black community, people are always like trying to get their, not always, and not all, but there is a notion and a stereotype that all white people are set up for success and that they are rich and they don't have any problems or any issues. And there's also this understanding that, if you see a black person, they're probably coming from a poor community that we automatically assume. So instances that are foundational in the fact that race and economic class are now becoming a one perspective and view in the United States during slavery becomes persistent during Reconstruction, and that exists today in 2023. Easy example, rappers aren't cool when they're rich. Lil Romeo, who was Master P's son, literally couldn't build a career, couldn't buy a career, right, in rap. He made a few songs, got a Disney Channel show, and they were like, oh, you're 17, you're out. You're not even Zendaya, right? So then you look at other rappers who are like, I came from the blah, 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 from the South, started at the bottom, made it to the top, blah, 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 whatever it is, right? And they have to have this struggle journey, this thug life journey, oftentimes to become popular, right? Because there's a brand of black people being in the bottom that works for exploitation, even if you can get paid for that today, right? And so there's different things that are permeating in our modern day society that come from this mindset and framework, okay? Now with the education and entrepreneurship, right? Now you have people who are trying to build their own schools and opportunities. Have you ever heard of Howard University?
Yes.
Right? Howard is a white last name. Have you ever heard of Morehouse College? Morehouse is a white last name. Have you ever heard of Spelman College?
Yeah.
Spelman is a white last name. Have you heard of Bethune-Cookman? Anybody? No. Black
Yeah.
last names. Okay, so what I'm showing here is that there was an effort to say we need to pour into the education of African Americans and make them contributing citizens at the same time that you have this kind of separate but equal concept coming into play, saying we need to build separate schools for blacks versus whites. As we're pointing to the education, and then you have people who are like, crap, I'm blanking on his name.
I got a question.
Yes.
So with the black schools in the South, do you think that the blacks, they couldn't do it by themselves? Like they had to go to the white man for the money, and that's why it was named
Yes.
after the white man?
Yes. Absolutely. So, one, if I'm founding a school, I'm naming it after myself. I don't care who's attending, right? Two, if I'm rich and I'm paying for something, you're naming it after me. I don't really care what it's for, right? That's kind of the mindset. Three, I can say I have a good heart. My last name is Howard. My last name is Morehouse. My last name is Spellman. I want to do something nice for the black people because I really want them to be able to grow up and have an opportunity. I believe that they should have an opportunity in America. Now, what opportunity in America meant back in 1804, 1822, when these colleges are being created, probably differs from what that may mean in 2023, but that was a good effort. That was a good, thing to create and to have. The first 4 presidents of Howard ended up being white men, but eventually, since then, they actually turned it over and started actually letting black leadership come into play, right? Howard's home to 3 or 4 of the first black fraternities and sororities that existed in the United States. There's also a lot of significance there. You can see that present day today, if I had to make it similar to like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where they're paying probably for more African Americans to go to college on a full scholarship scale than any other program, such as like an NAACP or even an Urban League, who also give out scholarships. So that's also how things that happened back then permeate today. And then if you go into political representation, there's this whole 3/5 of a human being. Have you heard of that phrase as well? Mm-hmm. Right? So at the time that we still had slavery, right before Reconstruction, they were able to count 3/5 of every slave as representation for the South, because the South realized that their major population was the slaves. And that was the only way that they'll be able to have enough representation as they're creating a new nation to be able to make sure they can still be, as they would put it, effectively represented, right? So this is where the concept of the House of Congress versus Senate comes into play, because the Senate says everybody gets 2 representatives for each state, so that's equal. But then you have states like California, which have probably one of the highest populations, top 5 population in the United States, versus Montana. No disrespect to anybody from Montana, but you can take the whole population of Montana and probably just roll it into one city in LA. Maybe it's Oakland at tops, best. It's at least Sacramento, right? So Montana, it doesn't make sense. So now people with larger populations are saying, we need more representation. So they create the House of Representatives that says, based upon your population, you can get that many representatives, which help influence our entire system that says you have to get it through Congress, the population at hand, and then you need to get it through the Senate, the equal representation of every single state, in order to have a policy pass through. And some of the policies that we saw that passed through, and you should do more research on this, it's going to be like the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. There's a documentary called The 13th Amendment on Netflix. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's still there, but it is freaking great. Mm-hmm. Watch it. I think it's actually like pretty accurate, okay? So now that we've talked about the hard parts, the stuff that we have to talk about, we have to get all that stuff out, I'm going to kind of zip through some of these modern times over these last 30 minutes. So that way we can now think about things that I believe are more positive and impactful, okay? But I just have to acknowledge where the resilience comes from. I have to acknowledge where a lot of our modern day racism, class perception, stereotypes, perspectives, and these are perspectives that people are battling within the African American community and also outside, right? Like we're in the United States, like it's all kind of mixed in, right? Which is, I guess, the point now, right? So you have the North Carolina Mutual Insurance Company. Has everybody ever heard of the North Carolina Mutual Insurance Company? Does anybody here have life insurance? No? Okay. Disability insurance? Car insurance?
Yes.
Okay. Woo! All right. Woo! All right. Get insurance, people. Life insurance is actually probably one of the greatest wealth building tools that you could possibly have. Right? I'm worth like $500,000 in life insurance. So if I pass away, my nieces and nephews will be having a grand old time. Okay? Don't kill
That
me.
was dark.
Horrible start, right? But if you don't have a house to pass down, you don't have wealth to pass down, you can guarantee that you can pass down money through life insurance. Most people think about it like, oh, I just want to cover the funeral costs, and this is how you can prevent yourself from having to do a fundraiser or an Indiegogo or whatever it's called, a GoFundMe for a funeral, right? The younger you are, the healthier you are, the cheaper your health insurance actually, your life insurance will actually be, but I'm not a financial advisor, so let me just stop talking there. But it's important, right? So the North Carolina Mutual Insurance Company has that epiphany, knows that in 1898. And then say if someone passes away, we can actually protect that life and make sure that the family is getting paid some money for that person because your life is valuable, yes?
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, it should, unfortunately, in this America, this capitalist system, so there has to be a dollar amount to your value at all times. What's the value of Fullerton? Whatever you're paying for tuition. So, for a minute, I just want you to think to yourself, how many black companies do you know that are over 100 years old? Right, exactly. So we'll keep talking. So in their founding vision, North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company is very historic. It was started in Durham, North Carolina, and it was basically created during a time in which African Americans were faced with such severe racial discrimination and limited economic opportunities, and the heights of Jim Crow starting to emerge. After Reconstruction, they kicked out every single black person out of the Senate, every black person out of the Congress. So now we don't have any representation politically. Like our nation wasn't created completely off the facts that we were getting taxed without representation, but they just recreated that entire issue with African Americans. So that led the North Carolina Mutual Insurance Company to say we have to protect black people, we have to pour into black people, we have to make sure that they are protected and have the same opportunities. So this is where you see a lot of whatever basically the white population is able to create for themselves in the United States history. You just see African Americans creating their own version because there was literal laws with the Jim Crow laws that prevented people from being able to vote, participate in politics, and be able to participate in business. It's separate but not equal. We can't sit at the same restaurant, so we damn sure can't get the same life insurance policies. So they're not going to allow us to be able to build and create wealth. That's the whole point of the Jim Crow laws, to prevent us from being able to actualize ourselves and optimize our potential as full citizens. This would have been a much better country if they literally said, okay, we messed up after slavery, here's your 40 acres, here's your mule, and you have the full voting rights of citizenship. But they didn't even give that to women. So they're definitely not going to give that to black people, and they're definitely not going to help anybody else of any other race or any other place at this point. So black people said, F it, we'll just do it ourselves. Because we kept going into office saying, will you help us? Will you work with us? And they just said, get somebody else to do it. And so that led to community involvement, but there's a lot of early challenges, right? When you're the North Carolina Mutual Company, and they're saying, we're not going to give you capital, right? So every time there's a new tech company, somebody funded that, right? There's venture capitalists are pouring into crypto, pouring into new businesses. But with current tech, and I'll get to this later, less than 2% of all money that venture capitalists have go towards African Americans. Less than 1% is really going towards women on top of that. So you just keep doing that demographic breakdown even further, and today's not even supposed to be racist. It is, but it's not supposed to be. And in 1898, let's just times that by 100, at least. So then they say, okay, we're going to keep doing this, and they rise to prominence. So black people say, you get all these monopolies, right? We've all played the game, but you get a monopoly when there's only one business that really you can go to. And eventually, North Carolina Life Insurance Mutual Company was pretty much the premier life insurance company for black people. And so they said, I need to get life insurance. Whether I'm in North Carolina or not, I'm going to go with North Carolina Mutual, the North Carolina Mutual, because that's the place that I can go, and that's the premier place that I can go to actually protect myself and my family. So that's what happens. And in the civil rights era, they kept going, and they did not stop. They kept on continuously helping people get life insurance. I know it seems minimal, But I wanted to tell you about how much life insurance I had and how if I passed away, that I can pass that down. I'm basically passing down half of a California home, right? Because they're all $1 million these days. And yes.
Can I ask how much you pay a month for your life insurance?
Whoa.
Yes. You don't have to answer. You don't have to answer.
I pay less than $100 a month.
Okay.
And I pay more than $50.
I
Like
just feel like
65.
it sounds like a good investment, of course, but like a single mom like me, I'm like, anything I can cut, I'll cut.
Yeah.
Even though in the grand scheme of things, I want my sons to be protected and I want
Right.
them to be well. But I'm like, no, it's optional.
Yeah. So
But-
I pay $65 a month, and that is for term insurance that you can, once you have it locked in, you can turn over to whole insurance, whole life, and
Okay.
that comes with a whole bunch of other benefits that you can use
Mm-hmm.
if we went into that. So term insurance literally just protects my family and pays them if I pass away.
Mhm.
Whole life insurance, I can technically borrow from that money and the cash value that I've put into it and
Interesting.
leverage it like a 401k. But since it's my life insurance,
Mhm.
it's guaranteed to get paid back if I pass away
Yeah,
today or 65 years from now.
interesting.
But I've already borrowed from it today. Potential.
And
you know?
what percentage of black folks have life insurance?
Ooh, it's like 14%.
What percent of white folks have life insurance?
It's like 36, something like that.
Okay.
I would have to double check those numbers though,
Okay.
because that's like 2017 stats.
Yeah.
And so I need to look back at that. But I think it's definitely more than double than what African Americans have currently today.
Mhm.
And that's like alarming in my opinion.
Yeah.
And you can get some term life insurance, like a $50,000 policy for like $14 a month, as long as you basically don't smoke cigarettes.
I can do that.
So yeah, I think it's super important. And then life insurance, people love a mom or a homeowner because you have someone that you really care about to protect. People like me are just trying to leverage the American system.
Yeah.
I mean, protect my family. So after the rise of prominence during the civil rights era, they kind of had a little fall off, in my opinion. North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance, because what was the civil rights era all about? Was it about continuing to build up the separate system that black people have built as a response to the Jim Crow laws? Or was it about dismantling those systems and integrating them into the greater white society? The second one. So with that integration of white society, there's no concentration of where African Americans could go. So just like bus systems and this life insurance, you really kind of see a lot of the company kind of go down, because now you can go to Geico. Now you can go to AIG. Now you can go to State Farm, right? And so now black companies don't have this kind of like default monopoly or one of 2 or 3 options that black people can go to. They're now one of 50, because now also the United States realized that one of the best economic opportunities they can do is being able to integrate African Americans into the larger economic opportunities, so that way they can pull from that money, which there is, I would say, a consistent debate between me and my other intellectual friends about whether or not that helped African Americans. I think it did from a consumer standpoint, but I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, it was a detriment to a certain extent. Yes.
Well, we studied Tulsa, Oklahoma. Does anyone want to
Oh,
explain
let's
how
go.
we saw that happening with them thriving, desegregation, and do folks know what I'm talking about?
No?
Somebody? Okay, well, we saw the story of Tulsa and they were thriving, but once desegregation hit, they couldn't hold that captive audience anymore. So
Yep.
it actually harmed them.
Yep.
Yeah.
So from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I think the civil rights era was a huge dip in the economic power of African Americans as a community,
Right.
although it did increase consumer opportunities. So maybe
Right.
yes, or every day you can buy your toilet paper or whatever at a
Right.
cheaper cost now, because
Right.
you can go into Betty White's,
Right.
store, but then now you're no longer going to like Lucy Ann's store.
Right.
You know, I'm just making up random names.
Yeah, I
Everybody
got that.
Ann with something Ann. I got family member named Valerie Ann, but we won't talk about her age. So let's just jump, right? We'll jump out of the civil rights era, and we'll jump straight into basically, we'll look into like the 1990s, 1980s, 90s, and 2000s a little bit. And we're gonna highlight Robert L. Johnson, Bob Johnson, who founded Black Entertainment Television. Have you heard of BET?
Yes.
Yes. Now, BET just got purchased by Tyler Perry. So Tyler Perry will be the new owner of BET. He bought it from Viacom. Viacom is the company that owns Centric, MTV, MTV2, and a couple other channels as well. So really hopping into media. And Bob Johnson's philosophy was one, if white guys can do it, I can do it. Point one. Part two, he was tired of, thank you. He was tired of the fact that Black entertainment was not really being showcased or really highlighted in a specific way, in a specific place. So my question for you is, who is the richest Black person in America?
Currently?
Was or
Is.
Ooh.
It's not Oprah. But she's top, I think she's top 5 for sure.
Jay-Z.
No, not Jay-Z. Jay-Z is number 3, I believe.
So that was a good guess.
Yeah, it's a very good guess. I think he has a 2.7
Well, is
billion
it
dollar
guessable?
net.
Is this person popular?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. His name is Robert Smith. Okay, that's the richest Black man in America. He has an $8 billion net worth, and he did it through private equity, which is essentially, you know what private equity is? Okay, so you know how you got a student loan to be here, right? And I shoot for at least half of you. Yes? No? No? Okay, I got at least a little. Yeah. Okay, y'all scholarship up. I like that. That's awesome. Yeah, private equity, basically, you can go to the bank, you can ask for a loan, right? And then the bank can give you a loan, and now you have a loan. But there are private companies that will do the same thing, and that's called private equity, right? So you have banks more well known, then you have companies that aren't as well known, but they are private equity. And so they basically will give you an investment instead of a loan in exchange for a percentage of your company. This is kind of where the idea of venture capital comes from. It can be merged out of private equity. Venture capital is just kind of like their cool new term to brand all the guys who said, I'm not going to wear suits, I'm going to wear a t-shirt instead, and do the same thing. So basically what I want you to take away from Bob Johnson is that he had a can-do mindset and said, I'm going to make sure that I highlight Black people, therefore creating almost like a Tulsa, Oklahoma experience of isolating and monopolizing Black entertainment in a way that was marketable, receivable, and most importantly to American economy, profitable. And then he sold BET to Viacom in 2010, I believe, or 2004, sorry. And then he went and bought the Charlotte Bobcats, which he then sold in 2010. And the Charlotte Bobcats was an expansion team for the National Basketball Association, the NBA. I said I wasn't going to talk about athletes, but I will talk about their owners, governors. I will talk about their governors. And he created that and then sold that for an undisclosed amount to Michael Jordan, thus allowing the Black dollar to be recirculated within the Black community, which is a whole nother concept that would definitely take a whole nother lecture. But just know that is also a statistical thing that we look at in economics at how many times is a dollar spent amongst a racial community before it exits and leaves, right? Just know it's like $2 for like Black people, and then it just continues to raise up from there in every demographic that you can think of in a race context. So then Bob Johnson said, I've been able to fight against the system. I've been able to overcome all of these obstacles. I've been able to create a monopolized opportunity. I've been able to get into the old boys network, aka you call an old boys network is any network where it's basically all white males. Okay, that clearly established some type of system, structure of business decades before somebody not white got in there. Specifically a not white male. And then he started advocating for reparations after he sold the team in 2010. And so he's taking his opportunity, his economic opportunity that he has and he's developed for himself, and using that as leverage to be able to create a conversation about how he believes that African Americans are still owed 40 acres and a mule, but for what that would be today if you add inflation or calculate it with inflation. And so he hasn't been able to get that passed as a policy, but because he is essentially a billionaire talking about it, he's getting more attention amongst what I would call the elite, economically elite class. And so more millionaires and billionaires and institutional leaders are talking about reparations than they ever have before, and he tends to be at the center of those meetings.
The presidential campaigns, didn't all of them have to talk about address reparations? Like, that's a legitimate claim.
So yeah, and that's because of Bob Johnson, in my opinion. Some people will say it's because of Ice Cube. I like Ice Cube.
I do, yeah, me
and
too.
That's my statement. So, yes.
For the 40 acres and a mule, so once Abraham Lincoln got out of office, or died,
Assassinated.
Yeah, assassinated.
The last
they just,
period.
did they just like dismantle that? Like, it wasn't even a conversation no more?
Yep. So, like today, if Joe Biden passed away, Kamala Harris would say, I know he was talking about student loans. I don't care about them student loans. Mine are paid. We're going to focus on this.
It wasn't written, documented, like this is what's going to happen?
So, like anything written in American policy, it can be unwritten. So I think it was a presidential order, but if there's a new president, he can reverse any presidential order. So oftentimes when we're voting for president, we'll talk about, presidents will say, as soon as I get into office, we're gonna repeal blah, 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 right? That was like half of Trump's campaign, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna repeal half of everything Obama just did, right? We're gonna end Obamacare, blah, 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 right? And so he was able to do like at least 25% of that from a stroke of a pen, instantly, right? Make it more difficult, get rid of it, right? He has some good things, he has some bad things, but he's like, that's what I'm gonna do, right? Majorly debatable, but we won't go into politics that deep today, okay? Yeah, y'all don't want my presidential rant. So, yes?
So what would you base the 40 acres cost off of? Because like land in California is super expensive, but if you go to Wyoming, there's nothing there for, like, it's gonna be like $1 for like,
Maybe.
yeah.
75
So like,
cents.
where would you go, or what would you base the 40 acres off of? Is it gonna be locally, or would it be like there's gonna be the richest place that we're gonna use that, or like the poorest place and we're gonna use that as the basis for that 40 acres cost?
So because of that debate, the federal discussion for reparations often gets stopped right there, and the United States has structured itself to say that's an independent state decision, since each state is to operate almost pretty much as its own nation. And that's where California is actually having a discussion on reparations, and they're looking at reparations to basically pay African Americans who have lived in the state for 20 years. I think it's somewhere up to, at the most, $1.1 million, and it can be a lower amount. And how they're going to calculate that, I think, is where the policy discussion is now. Like, what qualifies you for 1.1 versus $200,000, and how do we actually count that you were here for 20 years? And then I have even curious and more thoughts about that as well. I'm like how do you count black? Is it one drop rule in effect? Because that would end families because somebody was, a portion of black and they just couldn't participate in their families. Or is it going to be like the 3/5 rule? Or is it going to be like a 1/8 rule? Right? Are we going to do a brown paper bag test? Like, I don't know.
Also, people talk about, what about immigrants that come in, Nigerians, all these things. But my thing is, all black folk face anti-black oppression here in the United States and abroad. So to rectify discrimination, I think all black folks should have, be compensated to get to an equitable place. That's just me.
And I think that's where the discussion of what percentage or how much up to it gets, right? And that's like also in the debate, because it's very true. I'm like, okay, you don't have to have a history of slavery and be black in this country, but as soon as you move here, all that's put on you regardless.
Yes.
Right? So you're still faced with the same impact of Jim Crow and all those different laws.
Because the police don't care if you're from Uganda.
Right.
They don't.
Right. Unless you have the Ugandan accent, that might, slow the punch. I don't know if it's going to stop it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
How do we even have the money to pay? Does the government even have the money to pay for all that? Because like the amount of money we're spending on this like politicians going to like a rich ass place is a lot, and they're not gonna like cut back. They're not gonna be like, oh yeah, like let's make me poorer. Like they're not gonna do that. No one's that nice. So it's like, how are we gonna pay for all this?
Right. So that's also a question that people have, right? And then there's debates of, well, if we can just print the money for student loans, if we can just give $80 billion of support to Ukraine at the drop of a dime, right, over a year or so, if we can consistently fund our military, like how are we going to do that? You see political conversations about them wanting to cut public education. What if Cal State Fullerton didn't exist, right? You could only apply to Stanford and USC. Education was a lot different. So it's a consistent and ongoing debate. I don't have an answer. I don't know. Some people are like, you can just print the money. But then we'll say inflation. But then we'll say, does the total cost of reparations, is that larger than any other amount that we're spending in any other section of the United States when we come down to support and federal support, state support? And then that's where the debate kind of continues, which is why reparations haven't been given out, which is why reparations hasn't really been settled
only for Black
as a
folks, though.
discussion.
So internment
Right, for
camps
African
have
Americans.
gotten reparations. People that survived the Holocaust get reparations.
Mhm.
Like
people who were in Japanese internment camps in the
Yes,
19,
yes.
I think, what was that, 40s or something
we
like that.
can do it. We have done it.
Mhm.
We do
Even
it not
the
for Black
after
people, but for
shock.
everyone else.
Right, even after
Yeah.
like, I think after like, yeah, and then we can get policies implemented, right?
Mhm.
Like, and things like that as well. So I think there's still, in my opinion, an intrinsic hatred towards Black people that prevents any type of real progress or even saying sorry and acknowledging it because it's so huge of a up that the United States contributed to as a government, private citizens, and everyone in between that, America's just not willing to settle with that, It's like somebody who has anger issues and won't go to therapy.
Yeah.
We can't even get to the core because you're not even willing to actually have the real conversation, despite fake. So, yes.
Also, I think it's crazy that the government will help, like the Ukraine, for example. They're going to shut down the government, but we're giving them billions of dollars to support Ukraine. But now we got federal workers about to not get paid.
Right, they're going to shut down the government again.
Yeah, so
It's tradition at this point.
it's confusing. Like they got the money, but they
What you want to spend it on, right? Right? You get your refund check, you can't spend it on everything, right? That's how they look at it. But the government has this entire treasury, right? Has an entire opportunity to print that money. We saw with basically the checks that they were giving out, the stimulus checks during the pandemic, is actually incredibly possible, right?
Yes.
And so ultimately it's just not dire enough. And anyone who's basically running our government, whether it's Congress, House of Representatives, Senate, or whether it is the president. I guess there hasn't been a court case where someone sued for reparations that's been officially approved and recognized by the judicial branch. And so until we can get a significant win like that, it's going to be really difficult. And every year, the concept of slavery gets away from us, one further year. So, in my opinion, it sucks. It's owed to us. It hasn't been given to us. But I'm also not patient. I'm not going to wait for the United States government to give me my just due. Right? That's like waiting for somebody that you've been respecting and appreciating to finally respect and appreciate you, and it hasn't happened. So in my 34 years, I'm like, I'm good. I would like it. I will take the check. Trust. But I gotta find another way. And luckily, I'm not the only African American who's ever thought that. I have 3 examples here: Brandon Bryant, Pierre Laval, and then Austin. Right? Oh, excuse my title. So if we start with Harlem Capital in 2015 had a bunch of financial advisors who were all basically African American males who said, we are going to, fund diverse companies started by POCs, people of color, and make sure they had enough capital to launch their tech companies. Since about 2% of all venture capital is going towards African Americans, and the tech industry is the greatest wealth generation industry in the last 10 to 20 years. There's made more millionaires from the tech industry than any other industry that's existed basically in the United States. As in, I think 47% of people who have become a millionaire in the last 10 years attribute it towards the tech industry in some way, somehow. Bill Laval. Sees the same thing. Him and like 20 other people co-found Seat at the Table, which is a crowdfunding platform that allows black people to be able to raise money for their companies. So it's like that, rather than raising money for a funeral because you don't have life insurance, now you can raise money for your company that you have an idea for. Some people can get a company funded by writing their idea on a napkin. Some people got to make the entire business profitable already. And there's all these different opportunities in between, but you never really know until you put yourself out there. And if you're not getting any funding from the Harlem Capitals, or really the other 98% of the people who are really getting funding, and how they're getting funding from other venture capital and private equity firms, then you're gonna have to raise your own money. And this is where you have the concepts like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Where people say you just gotta do it yourself, right? I would debate if black people from a metaphorical stance have bootstraps, but I mean, the answer is some. Not all. And then we have Austin, and I've had the pleasure of actually meeting Pierre, and I have the pleasure of meeting Austin's co-founder, whose name is AJ, and they invest in small to medium-sized businesses that are SaaS, software as a service. That's like Spotify. Spotify is a software that you pay $10 a month for, and so you subscribe to it every month. And that creates something called MRR, monthly recurring revenue. And so those type of companies are the same type of companies that are over here getting the most money and making the most millionaires. And so they make sure that they're investing in that and investing in consumer tech. You have stages like pre-seed and seed. Pre-seed means I have an idea, I started my business, I got a website, I made $10, I'm trying to figure out how to get more. But I need more money in order to make more money. So can you help me out? I'm not really raising funds, but I'm trying to make sure that I have some type of money to fix my operational costs. The seed round is like, no, we're here, we've proved the concept, we can do this. I'm excited for it, but once again, we need more money because now we just need to market it really well. Like the product is great, but no one knows about it. And the reason this is important is because honestly, there's statistical research that shows if you're in education and you're learning from somebody that looks like you, you're more likely to pay attention and be engaged, right? Same thing when it comes to business. If you're sitting across from a table and somebody looks like you, you're more likely to invest in them. You're more likely to be able to secure that investment from them. I don't make the rules, I don't make the races. This is just how the statistical information is categorized. But of course, like I said earlier, a lot of this economic history is going to be categorized in a way that's going to be racialized, okay? So, I know we're pretty much gonna just finish up here with just a few minutes left. So here's some quick stats. We got Robert Smith, my boy, $8 billion over here. 8% of millionaires in the United States are black. Also, 96% of black-owned businesses are non-employer firms, which means they're solopreneurs. Somebody is just running the company by themselves, doing everything. And then 32% of black-owned employer firms are in the healthcare and social services. And so you can see that healthcare can be anything from like dialysis, home care, all the way to running an entire hospital. Okay, because hospitals are businesses too. This is America. Okay, and then you have RLJ Lodging Trust, which is the largest publicly owned black business at a net worth of about $6 billion as of June 2020. Okay, so that's probably went up a little bit. Just some quick stats, okay? And then here's my last slide. If you want to, or my last like significant slide, if you want to learn more, here are some resources. I encourage you to write down one. All right, Black Enterprise is an entire magazine dedicated to black business. There's the owner, Earl Graves, once wrote a book called How to Succeed in Business Without Being White. There's a guy named Napoleon Hill. Have you all heard of him?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he had a mentee called Dennis Kimbrough. And Napoleon Hill used to work for a lot of leaders. He's known as like the godfather of like motivational speaking and like affirmations and manifestation and if I think it, I can do it. He wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich. And Dennis Kimbrough was like, well, we need one with black examples because the black experience is slightly different than the white experience, especially when we're trying to pursue wealth. That wealth gap and that experience gap widens. And then there's Reginald Lewis. He's just a fun guy who says, why should white guys have all the fun? And he was essentially one of like the most recent modern millionaires that we've had in the United States, but he reached like a certain prominence. Without the politics attached, he was essentially a black Trump, okay? And then you have Earn Your Leisure podcast. If you just want to listen to something on your own, every single week. They're posting different things that Black people can do, listen to, invest in, be aware of to make them successful each and every single day in regards to the modern financial plane. Personal finance, business finance, private equity, all things in between, and that's where you can actually see a lot of these modern people like Robert Smith, who are consistently millionaires now, actually talk about what they're doing to reach success as Black people in America. And my name is Miles Goodlow, and I thank you for listening.
Woo! Thanks, everybody.
You know what I'm saying? And it's not on here, but if you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm at TeachPayMiles. That's what this logo was this entire time over here, because I brand everything. TeachPay, yes.
Thanks, folks. If anybody wants to stay behind and ask questions, you can. If
Yes.
not, I'm wishing everybody a great rest of their day. See you Thursday. See some of you guys in the ARC.